everyone, welcome to the Northland Artists Conversation. I am your host, your guide, the person that asks the questions that often need answering. My name is Mark Kelly, and today's podcast, wow, literally just finished it. A wonderful gentleman by the name of Rod Cunliffe, who is a bit of a potter, does a bit of woodwork, does a bit of metallurgy, does a bit of DIY stuff as well. Super cool to talk to. Interesting fact, we had his wife, Wendy, on the podcast quite early on in the piece. So if you're someone that wants a bit of a giggle, have a listen to this one and then go back and find Wendy's back to back. They're really, really fascinating. I'm going to throw to my camera now. It was interesting having a chat with Rod because he is someone that teaches. He is a tutor. He works with people, and you can really tell that he is an educator because he talks in great depth and knowledge about pottery. He may not agree with me and say I know bugger all compared to some people, but the way Editor Andrew, it would be fair to say that he was sort of talking with a certain amount of authority and he was confident and he knew what he was talking about. Right, Editor Rocky is just kind of sitting there blankly looking at me. Good stuff. It's good to have. I've missed you, Editor Rocky. It's nice to have you back. It really is. It's really good. Producer Andrew is actually away at the moment. What did he do? We went for a walk and did some fishing and injured his back. I think something along those lines. So, Producer Andrew, I hope you feel better soon. But as I was saying, Rod is one of these amazing people that can just pass on information. And I was asking, I'll be honest, what I thought were a lot of dumb questions. He said the word thrown a lot or throw a lot. And I interpreted that in a couple of different ways. It's basically you take some clay and you sculpt it and then you throw the pot, basically. Now, I thought that either meant you were throwing the clay at the clay wheel and you were making something, or potters had such bad luck to start, like in the early stages, that they were throwing a lot of stuff away. That's honestly what I thought it was. Turns out it's actually not that at all. Have a listen to the podcast. He does explain it quite well. Tell you what, how about I shut up and you get stuck into it. Let's sit down and have a conversation with Rod Cunliffe. We just start. There's no real formal introduction. Well, we do. I guess we do have a bit of a formal introduction. We do. I will say something like, "Hello, Rod Cunliffe. Welcome to Northland Artists Conversation. Thank you very much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it."
Thank you for the invite.
And then, of course, absolutely. It's great. So it's great to get you on. So for people watching and listening, if you've watched a few or listened to a few of the podcasts, some people are going to go, "Cunliffe, that surname sounds familiar. Why is that?"
Well, I'm married to a Cunliffe, funny old thing, and her first name is Wendy, and she did a podcast here a little while back.
She did. She was one of our early guests, and she was awesome. Super cool. Super cool. I learned a lot from her, including what paper clay is,
Yes.
and that not everything looks like the film Ghost.
No. But I do have that record on my phone.
Oh, it's brilliant. That's great. So this podcast is going to be the first husband and wife, sort of combo that we've had along the way. And for us to sort of have you both within the space of a year is really cool, because she had highly recommended you. She, you should get Rod on. He'll be amazing. So I was like, okay then. So when we caught up at Artbeat, which was a few weeks ago, I was like, aha, you're the guy that I need to get on. So thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
So with all pods, so for people watching, I don't have my notes with me. Normally I have a list of notes, but when the reminder went out, we forgot to send out the PDF for which all our artists fill out information. So today's podcast will be, well, we know the format, but it'll be quite interesting because sometimes I refer to the notes. So this is all going to be really off the top of the head. Are you ready?
Oh, fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Good. Now, you are someone who works with pottery, and as we were sort of talking before we started filming, you also work with wood and metal.
Yes, I do.
I'm always curious to know how you got started in being a creative person. I remember Wendy's journey was she was a teacher, but she used to like drawing the biology stuff. Where did sort of creativity come from you?
Well, I suppose really at school, my art teacher Jack Harrison had this thing called a wheel in the corner of his art studio. He was a fine artist, and this wheel was always spotlessly clean, never used. And I just wondered whether it's something that I could be good at, because my father was a really talented artist, and didn't make much of it because he was raising a family and teaching and things.
Yep.
But I remember his sketch of two old boots of his in pencil. They were just alive, these boots. They probably were,
wow.
literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's from my father more than my mother that I've got an art interest.
Okay.
But certainly Jack Harrison, I went up to the age of 18, 19 at school, so that's the upper sixth.
Right.
Specialising in art. And I did architecture with him as well. So there was that interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I did wood carving for my signature piece out of walnut. So it was two figurines facing each other.
Okay.
And it's like, it's not, no faces. It was just sort of a blank face. I couldn't do faces really, to be fair.
Right. Okay. Yep.
But there were holes driven through the wood to give you more interest. And I suppose that's his legacy carries on, because I've made similar things out of ceramics that look very similar.
Oh, wow.
To that wooden sculpture. And a friend of ours, and I went bigger, of course. You have to do something different.
You do.
So I made a 3-foot high one out of clay with a friend of ours and Wendy, and that's now at another friend's house as a 70th birthday present for him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's a kind of like a big leap from adolescent. There was a family in the way, education, children, all sorts of things. And then that was all round the UK. When I got my first job as a teacher in Doncaster, we were wandering around the country lanes and we found this farm that was called Robin's Potteries. So we went in there on the Saturday morning.
Yeah.
And there was a wheel. And I thought, I'll have a go. So I paid my 50p for a small amount of clay.
50p?
Yeah. And threw a pot. I mean, it was, in hindsight, they left me alone for an hour and I threw one pot. But they came back and they said, would you like a job demonstrating how to throw on the wheel? They obviously thought I was quite good.
Wow, okay.
I certainly wasn't able to, hold people's attention because didn't know what I was doing at all.
Yeah.
And I said I really couldn't do because I have teaching to do on the Saturday mornings with, looking after the football team and the cricket teams.
Of course, yeah.
So that was then. And then leapfrog forward a few decades, come out to New Zealand, still working at Boys High School. And I suppose the formal education that I had up to the age of 18, 19 still lingers.
Okay.
And when Wendy started, and I'm now talking about Wendy now, which I shouldn't do because you already know this, but she started doing some pottery with a friend of hers.
She did,
in the Firebirds. And I was thinking, well, I'm going to retire at some point in the future. What I need to do is do something with my wife so we are together doing something.
Yeah.
And the transition shouldn't be traumatic. It should be gradual. So I went down on the Thursday nights, I think it was, and started practicing the wheel like 17 years ago or thereabouts. The rest is history, really. It's just looked at YouTube. Sin Chun Ling is a Korean immigrant to Los Angeles. I think he was the first potter that got 1 million hits. Excuse me. And it was great to learn from him and his hands.
Yeah.
It was like a ballet, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being on the podcast. That's it. No, I'm
Sorry.
No. Look, I mean that's a really in-depth overview, which is great. I guess for me, I want to go back to when you were at school.
Okay.
You know, because that's kind of where it starts for most of us. And as you said, you were in the art class, and you saw the potter's wheel, and you did woodwork. You did that as your piece for the end of the year. What led you there? Because obviously we've kind of skipped some parts as well. When you were, did the interest in pottery happen just at that moment? But when did the interest in wood start as well? Because is that, sitting down and making stuff when you're a youngster, you sort of, are you and Dad kind of working together? How did all that kind of come about? We're gonna go deep here.
All right. Well, my dad was the teacher at school, and so was my mother. So I couldn't escape, really. If I was naughty at school, I was also known about and naughty at home as well. So I got a double whammy.
Just can't get away from your parents.
So I was interested in the woodworking, metalworking, and art and sport. All that side of the school.
Yeah.
The academic side of it was always going to be always hard work, but it was. I managed to survive, I suppose. But the real enjoyment was the practical aspects of it. My dad was practical, and he would do lots of DIY at home.
Right. Okay.
And obviously had tools in his garage.
Yeah.
Carving tools, gouges and things. And we had a rhododendron plant, probably the only one we had in our garden.
Okay.
That my mum revered. And so I took a leaf that had fallen down, and I carved a rhododendron leaf, and I've still got that very first carving that I did in semi-relief of my mum's rhododendron.
So that's literally from a kid, and then as you grew up, and then it's come over from England with you as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, all the many early things that I made were my mother's. I did a lampshade for her. And she had that, because I'd made it.
Of course.
And when she passed away, the three of us, the three children, decided to split up the estate.
Yeah.
Equitably, if we could. So all the things that we'd given, we then were given first choice to take it away.
Oh, wow.
And basically, we just emigrated out to New Zealand at the time.
Yeah.
So the piano came, because I was the pianist.
Pianist as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I play the trumpet and guitar badly.
All right.
But if you want to talk about music, Michael, our son, is the bee's knees in like jazz.
Yeah.
You might get on with him quite well, actually.
Anyway. Yeah.
So I have to take a sidestep because he is very talented, and I'm just like a learner,
Yeah.
I've lost my train of thought now, but certainly
you were getting stuff from your mother's estate.
Yeah. So, if I could afford to export a piano, does this card work? Then, which we managed to do. Then the box would surround the piano, and there were spaces in the box. So I put a little table in there and whacked as much as we could in the box, and then like 12 weeks later, it arrived in New Zealand.
Wow.
So I think the other thing which I suppose really, if you've got thumbs that do that, so like the gap in between, so that's what you're trying to do with the thumb. They're potter's thumbs. You've got potter's thumbs.
I've always called them hitchhiker's thumbs.
Well, that may well be.
That's what I'd heard. Because it was like, my thumb, thumb bends.
If you've got a curly, bendy thumb, then you're able to lift pots. Throw the pots more easily. And certainly, I'd use that with my right hand.
There we go. Editor Rocky's like, that's interesting to know.
There you go.
There you go. Okay, so you essentially discovered a love of practical and tactile stuff. It's the doing from your dad.
Yeah, really. Yeah. I mean, the DIY was born out of necessity.
Yeah.
You know, and then I suppose I've carried that on because I was in the Royal Air Force whilst I was over in the UK for 27 years.
Okay.
So we moved from one house to another house, rather than living in married quarters. It means then we had a house that was ours. No matter what happened to the market, we still had a house.
Right.
When you leave the service, you get a gratuity that might buy a car, you know, basically, but won't buy you a house.
Yeah.
So that was our moonlighting, as it were. Wendy and I would stay up until midnight, you know, redoing a kitchen, redoing the bathroom, the usual DIY stuff. So I built up lots of tools, and you talked about metal and woodwork.
Yes.
Well, they came into fore.
Mm-hmm.
Pottery didn't really exist whilst the house was being, you know, redone, constructed.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, there's not, you know, you don't really have a, I need to sit down and make some ceramic pipes
or a toilet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah.
You know, we
Hand
can buy
basin.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably better, wiser to buy one.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how the metalwork and the woodwork, you know, developed.
Yeah.
Because that's what you're doing, and plastering and doing all the stuff necessary to survive in a house that we could afford.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what were you doing in the Royal Air Force for 27 years?
Right. Well, I was in the administrative branch as a physical education specialist.
Okay.
So I was the one that was teaching the aircrew how to parachute, how to survive, combat survival rescue officer, and keeping people fit, and taking people on expeditions, which actually turned out to be really, really good, although you had to work very hard to get you a 2 weeks gap in your workload, because someone else is going to have to deputise for you. And I, thanks to the Queen, or the taxpayer really, I was given sufficient money in order to train so I could become a ski instructor. So I would take people out to the Alps, went over to the Rockies.
Yeah.
I went out to the Hardangervidda in Norway to do freeheeling skiing. That was hard work.
It sounds like it would have been a real struggle.
Yeah, well, yeah, uphill is struggling.
Uphill's a struggle.
Yeah, mind you, going downhill is bad enough when you fall over, you know. Yeah. So, that was really what kept me going. I mean, the rest of the year was like, you know, looking after people's fitness testing, making sure that your boss is always happy.
Yep.
And as you move up through the ranks, you get to a greater administrative responsibility. I ended up being a Royal Air Force commander at an American base. So I was the RAF representative at that base, looking after 450 Ministry of Defence personnel.
Okay.
So
I mean, it sounds like a Saturday, really. Yeah.
So pottery couldn't exist.
No.
You know, in those days.
So, wow. Okay. I wasn't expecting this when we sat down. What's one really cool story from your time in the RAF that you can actually share? Well, everything will be declassified now, isn't it? That's how it works. 50 years.
Well, I suppose the one I liked most of all, really, was how the name New York came about. And I was actually...
The city, New York?
Yeah.
Okay.
The name of that. It used to be called New Amsterdam.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I guess that makes sense, because there's a New Amsterdam hospital.
Yeah.
There's, okay.
So, as the story goes,
Mm-hmm.
In the Isle of Ron, you know, the trade in spices and herbs.
Yes.
And I can't remember the dates exactly, but I mean, there was the Dutch already out there, and the English wanted to get out there as well.
Okay.
And there were fights on the high seas and all sorts of things. So eventually, this factor, and that's where the name factory comes from, the person who looks after factories is called a factor, went out there on a boat.
Yeah.
And introduced himself to the king of, I can't remember the island group, but I mean the king of several islands, including the Isle of Ron. And the king said, well, I like your queen. I think she's a wonderful woman. Please give my kindest regards to Queen Elizabeth the First.
The first, right. Yeah.
And of course, he knew, the factor knew that she'd passed away several years ago and didn't want to disillusion him. So he thought, well, that's very good. I'll pass the message on for you.
Yep.
And he said, as a token of my gesture, I will give this island of Ron to your queen.
Yeah.
All right. So after several years of battling and trying to fend off the Dutch then actually invaded and killed the factor and his remaining few people on the island.
Oh, wow.
And it was all to do with nutmegs. A bucket load of nutmegs meant you're a millionaire, basically, in those days. So all of that went to The Hague because...
Nutmeg as in...
Nutmeg as in on top of rice pudding.
Wow, okay.
And so in The Hague, there was a huge amount of uproar about the Dutch invading and taking over an island.
Yeah.
And of course, the Dutch were also in New Amsterdam.
New Amsterdam, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And there was a little island called Long Island, if I remember rightly.
Yep.
And so the exchange went on in The Hague, saying that in compensation for taking the Isle of Ron, then Long Island would become British property instead of Dutch property, and that's why it was renamed from New Amsterdam to New York.
Oh, wow.
What's that going to do with ceramics?
Well, it's not, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
So
I told that to the American audience.
Yeah.
And they're kind of gobsmacked. What's all that about? Telling lies. But actually, it was a journalist who had done this research, and it's called the Isle of Ron. And it's an interesting story. How much of that is absolutely true, I don't know.
Well,
but it's a good story.
It's all subjective, really. It's a great story, though. So I'm just trying to think. So you, as someone who was in is it the Royal Air Force?
The Royal RAF.
Royal Air Force. And are you being sent off to different places in stations, or are you kind of mainly focused in...
Well, I would love to have been posted overseas, but that wasn't... The services were retracting at the time, or
right.
Contracting. So that's why expeditions, for me, gave me a chance to go overseas and do my military activities there. But basically, I was bound in England, Royal Air Force, Lincolnshire, if you like, because it's flat and lots of stations are there.
Okay. Do you think that your time in the RAF kind of informed any of your work that would come afterwards?
In terms of the art?
Yeah. In terms of what you created?
I'm not conscious of that, but I'm conscious of the way I approach the work. You can imagine that there's a military... I line things up in straight lines.
Okay.
And that might be OCD, I'm not too sure, but... there's a certain kind of discipline in making something as efficient as possible.
Yeah.
And yet, having said straight lines, I quite like things with curves. I mean, the heron that I made that was 3 meters tall is just like all curves. So how I attack or approach things is quite methodical. I'm more or less a two-dimensional artist. If you can think that the potter's wheel gives me the third dimension, so all I have to move is out and up, and then it becomes 3D. And I realise it's limited what I can do. And there's a piece called Entwine that I did. So I threw a pot that's about 700 millimeters tall. Not tall.
It's a decent pot. Yeah.
And then you nip the rim around so it becomes bifurcated, and then I hand build 2 necks that entwine around the top, and it's just like 2 herons being entwined that join together as a base. So hand building has, I'm moving into that more.
Yeah.
Whether I've been influenced by the Royal Air Force, I don't know. I think there is. I don't do airplanes.
No, but I'm thinking the military is quite structured, right? And there's it's very hierarchical, very process driven. When you start a new piece, do you just sort of look at a piece of clay and go, I don't know what I'm going to come up with, and shit just happens? Or are you someone that goes, I'm inspired by, and then you'll map out a way of doing things? Well, I guess that was kind of more where my question was. Like, obviously, you're not doing planes, but birds of flight.
It's true.
Thank you. But it's more about, do you attack the process from a very, not clinical, but a very structured perspective?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, really, that I am inspired by other people's art.
Yeah.
But you got to be careful. You don't copy other people's art. So you pluck little bits out there, and you try and produce something that has like a uniqueness about it because you've taken 10% from various bits and produced your own thing. And sometimes there's an evolution even from that process. But when you are throwing your pots, you have to be careful about what clay you're going to use, how thick it needs to be, what's your intentions. You want to stretch it, so you have to have a thickness of the wall so you can stretch it. So there is this kind of planning ahead.
Yeah.
Not that I haven't had some disasters.
I think all artists have had disasters somewhere along the way.
So I'd like to think that I'm thoughtful about what I do.
Okay.
I do remember going on a woodturner's course at the Quarry Arts, and Graham Priddle, who was the instructor there, he said, right, draw 32-inch circles on your piece of paper. So we had about a 5-minute debate. Was that 32-inch ones or 32-inch ones?
Yeah.
He said, it doesn't matter, just go out. And what he wanted us to do was draw in each of those circles something that you saw that inspired you. I mean, so you see a bit of a leaf on the floor, you draw a leaf, you draw a raindrop, and so on, to give you that like inspiration to come back and then translate that inspiration in a circular wood form. And so the wheel was a natural progression from the lathe. I think that's how it worked, really. So you could make, and I made a particular piece, and I have photographs, of a ripple. You've got like the Jarrah jar that's like a raindrop with the lid that comes off, and then it rests on a platter, but the platter is like ripples of waves going out.
Oh, wow.
And so you can have a circle of almonds, a circle of cashew nuts, and whatever, hazelnuts. And that was, I made that whilst I was there. I've still got the Jarrah lid vase.
Yeah.
But the macrocarpa platter never made it because the course ended and I didn't have a lathe at the time.
Oh, no.
So something which you might be aware of is that I was the site manager for the collaboration. We've just had one over at Mount Mania. And I think it was 2 times ago, there was a wood carver, a wood turner, and Justin Kalina, who's the glass blower. So I asked them if you could do my design, and they made what I was looking for out of glass and swamp kauri.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So yeah, I've got a photograph of that. You know, so I mean, there are good ideas that I have.
Yeah.
Maybe the method of application, using the right materials for what you want, is the important decision to be made at the beginning. Because sometimes ceramics is not the right thing to use. Glass, when Justin Cleaner gets going, it's just beautiful. Put my pottery to shame, really, because I hadn't glazed it. It was just clay.
Yeah.
You know, so, yeah.
Northland Artists Conversation are incredibly proud to support the Quarry Arts Centre. Quarry Arts Centre, amazing place, located on Selwyn Ave in Whangarei. Such a wonderfully beautiful venue. They are an art gallery and they have some amazing exhibitions, and they also hold Te Kōwhai Print Trust as well. Another really, really cool artistic endeavour that's done as well. They will have different exhibitions and shows of all different types of medium available as well, and they're such a long-standing venue in the community as well. Highly recommend you checking them out. Fantastic place. Really, really cool to take the kids and family as well. So, Northland Artists Conversation, proud to support the Quarry Arts Centre. Okay, so you've mentioned it a couple of times, and Wendy didn't talk about it, but you've said it a few times in the podcast. What is throw? What do you mean by throw? Do you just take something and go, fuck it? Or do you... or
Yeah, usually.
Or is there like actually some kind of meaning behind it?
Well, it's obviously a term that you use as a person that is using a wheel to make pots using the spinning action of the turntable. That is called throwing a pot. Strange words, I suppose.
Yeah.
When literally, you're not actually throwing it anywhere. You're actually lifting it. You're centering it, lifting it. And I don't know how it evolved, but maybe once it's been produced, it becomes something that can be done very quickly.
Yeah.
So in a way, a hand builder would spend, coiling technique or slabbing techniques that Wendy would do, whereas I could knock up something like that in like 3 or 4 minutes, or even quicker. I had to make 300 ramekins for Bocky Boo, the
gelato.
cafe.
Yes. Yeah. They do have great gelato, Bocky Boo.
Yeah.
Bring back your pineapple, please. Your pineapple sorbet is to die for.
There you go. Free plugging.
Yeah.
And that becomes production, which is totally different, rather than making a unique piece.
Yeah.
So you have to then make a ramekin, and I had 3 different sizes specified by the owner.
Yeah.
And so you had to make each one the same.
Yeah.
But you can't, because it's made by a human rather than a robot. So you have templates and mechanisms by which you do it.
Yeah.
And I was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get through the process, so I didn't have a huge amount of space, so I had to do them in batches. And the process is quite tortuous, really. You've got to wait for the clay to dry, having made one, and then you make another 50. The first one, by that time, is it ready then for the next stage? So you have to sort of dovetail your cadence.
Right, yeah.
And I ended up, because I was repeating the same actions, and I got down from about 9 minutes down to about 7 minutes to make the ramekins in total. I wore out my fingernail, not that way, but that way.
Oh, wow.
That was quite painful. After a few days, I was in a lot of pain, really. Yeah. And your fingers and your hands your skin starts to crack.
Yeah.
You use all the creams in the world.
Would you get RSI? Would you get RSI as well?
Well, arthritis.
Yeah. Okay.
Cramp.
Yep.
Anything and everything you can get, and you end up managing, because you've got alternatives with your hands. So the whole process is throwing a piece. It looks as though you've thrown it onto the wheel, and then you can actually do all the various segments. For a beginner that would take maybe 7 stages to get through, you can actually combine those by just centering it, dropping down the hole, bringing up the side, and now you've thrown a piece. It looks as though all you've done is that, in that speed. And so if you have a different design and you have a template to go to, then you have to make sure the sides are the right angle, the right height, the right thickness, and you have to compress the clay so you don't get things called S-cracks, because the clay has a memory. I did an experiment throwing a vase, and I wanted it designed with strips of black clay in the white clay. So I put that in, and then, having scented it, I then threw the pot, and the actual black lines went round 12 times on the final piece. So you're now imagining that your clay wants to come back to where it was.
Yes.
And so that's how the S-crack can appear, because it's wanting to go back to where it was. So you have to compress it to tell it where to stay. So that the action of all those segments put together looks as though you're kind of just throwing on the clay and you lift it up and off you go. Because some people, a lot better, a lot faster than me, can make these things. And they even put them on something called a bat, which is just an easy way of removing the pot from the wheel to put another one on. Some use plaster of Paris bats. So they're concaved. You throw your clay on that particular bat.
Yep.
And because the plaster of Paris dries out the clay, you've only got a short period of time before it will not remain sticking to the plaster of Paris bat.
Yeah.
And if you're quite canny, you just scribe in your name in the plaster of Paris. You don't even have to sign what you've made, because you've now
just imprints on the bottom.
You've now got a curved base. You don't have to trim the base. So an extra 5 minutes trimming things. It's already done.
Wow.
So that's kind of like, cutting short corners.
Finding efficiencies.
Yes. Okay. Mind you, the chap I was watching do that also had, this was 9 o'clock demonstrations down in Hamilton.
Yeah.
Had a crate of beer on the other hand as well, drinking pints of beer about 9:30 in the morning. And his pots were good initially.
But not so as the
They were
crate.
more interesting towards the midday.
Of course they were.
Yeah.
As someone who kind of dabbles in a few creative fields, do you have any one, or I guess a group of people that you sort of look at and go, yes, I am inspired by this person or that person, or a collective?
The collaboration is a collective. The last one we had about 80 plus artists from around the world.
Wow.
Down at Mount Mania, the Baptist grounds there. And you all go with your own particular expertise, but the point is to collaborate. So you as a potter may collaborate with other potters, but if you want to have your pot to be mounted somewhere, you may want to go to the woodwork department, or maybe if you want it to be mounted, elevated off the ground, the metalwork department. There's also jewelers there as well. And then you've got weavers.
Oh, wow.
And glass blowers.
Yeah.
And glass slumping. And it's a beautiful ferment of enthusiasm in their own disciplines and the willingness to share. There are two girls, I think they call themselves the Metal Birds, but one was called the Iron Maiden,
Yeah.
a nod to Margaret Thatcher, but also her skill in metalworking.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure which one. They were sisters. Did an octopus out of metal, just beating it to death almost, but creating an octopus, attached it to a paddle. And a lady from Canada, who was one of our artists, bought it. And I think the bidding was like 200, 250, 300.
Yeah.
And she said 1,000. Straight out.
What? Straight out.
She wanted that because it identified with her,
Yeah.
I don't know all the details, but it just echoed what collaboration is all about. Someone had found a paddle, renovated it, painted it, and someone did the metalwork and attached it. Why would a paddle have an octopus attached to it? Well, it's all to do with the sea.
Yeah,
So it's very
exactly.
symbolic.
How do you collaborate with other potters? And I know this sounds like a silly question, and you're probably going to explain it, and I'm going to have that moment where I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But if it's you and a wheel, do you go, well, I'm going to have 5 minutes, and then you come along and have 5 minutes, and then I'll come back after your 5 minutes? And do you take turns, or is there like one person on each side, and there's like 4 hands on this clay?
I tell you what, that's Ghost for you.
Well, that's if I was sitting behind you, then you'd be like 4 hands,
Yeah.
lovingly caressing this clay.
I don't think we've gone that far, but you do need to have a complementary hand on the inside and outside of a thrown pot.
Yeah.
You've got to know what each hand is doing, and so you would link those hands together. If you don't, and they're your hands, then you can mismatch your fingers, and they won't know where they are because one hand's blind inside the pot.
Yes, of course.
Really, the collaboration takes a next level, if you like. A lady called Sandra from Canada.
Okay.
She was one of the potters, and she'd say, "Look, if you need anything carving, that's my forte."
Right.
And so I'd thrown a jug, but hadn't put a handle on it. It was going to be something else.
Yeah.
And then a couple of days later, I said, "Well, do you think you could do a handle for me?" So she made a tuatara out of the handle I'd made. I'd made it like tuatara essence with a tail sweeping round.
Yeah.
And it curves round. And I mean, it's alive. You're holding you're almost worried about holding this tuatara on this jug.
Wow.
Unfortunately, the whole process for doing the whole thing takes longer than 10 days because you have to dry the stuff, you bisque fire it, then and so on, and glazing. And we had a problem with our kilns at Collaboration, so I had to take them home. My kiln broke down. We had to take them somewhere else. So rather than maybe get it through, in a damp, wet condition, let's keep it safe. And I said, 2 years' time, we'll have that piece ready to be displayed and put on auction.
Yeah, definitely.
Or I'll take it to Canada when you have your collaboration thing. That kind of idea. And so a different specialisation, even within the clay making, like a hand builder, making those necks on the herons, could take over.
Yes, yeah.
And like Wendy was doing the lips on the cups that I'd made for Bocky Boo, because she was hand building the second lip for the mocha cups of coffee.
Oh, wow, okay.
So, I mean, you can't throw that.
No.
Because it's non-circular.
Yeah.
I thought about it, but it didn't work.
Yeah, give it a try.
Other people, like I brought my raku kiln, which is like a converted 200-litre oil drums, insulated.
Yeah.
And the raku process can take, 40 minutes rather than 48 hours to heat up the clay that's already been bisque-fired. And you have glazes that are reduced so that instead of being copper oxide, it comes out a turquoise colour. It comes out copper. Shiny metal copper.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And you have to fix that.
Yeah.
And you put that in a reduction chamber, and then you can rapid cool it in water or leave it to cool. But the whole process takes about 40 minutes. And that was our saving grace, really, to speed up the process so we could get things out for the auction on Saturday.
That's intense.
Yeah. So, collaboration.
There we go. That was my original question. Yeah. I mean, and obviously if you've got such a wide and diverse range of artists, you might have people that are good with glazes and colours and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yes?
Well,
Am I on the right point?
Eddie Doughton came over from the UK, and he's been potting since he was 13, and he's been a potter all his life. He's in his mid-70s. I'm guessing now. He looks like Gandalf. He's 6'7" tall, great big white beard and a big stick, and a charming chap. Loves raku firing.
Does he allow people to pass?
Now and then.
Okay, good. Okay. Dad jokes.
Yeah, sorry.
Rocky's shaking his head.
So I learned about some of his glazes. There's three elements. And he just throws a bit of that in, and a little bit of that. Okay, but it comes from years of experience.
Yeah.
A bit like, a chef who knows how much salt to put in. They don't, measure it out. They just put salt in. They know the taste and all that. And I think he's at that level that he does it almost subconsciously. And it was very interesting by osmosis, getting that information from him, how he throws. He doesn't like this newfangled thing called electricity, so he has a kick wheel, and so he just kicks the wheel, and it's quiet, it's peaceful, and it's almost therapeutic. The whole thing is back to nature, where people enjoy that process from the earth to the earth and cycling it back again.
Potter's wheels, I'm guessing nowadays, a lot of them have power because it's consistent and it just keeps that flow. Yeah. But would you have the ones where you'd stamp?
There are treadle ones where you're standing up and one leg's going back and forwards, and of course the circular movement's created. And they're less popular because you aren't sitting down. If you could sit down and do that action, that's fine.
Yeah.
The treadle gives you double movement rather than the wheel, which is a single movement.
Right.
If you can see what I'm doing with my foot, then you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, we've got a wide shot on that one. Whoever edits this, whether it's editor Rocky or producer Andrew.
But and it's a lot of it is personal preference. I prefer to use this thing called electricity.
Yeah.
So that you can concentrate on the wheel, but of course you have to adjust the speed as well. And the wheels can go in either direction, and some people are left-handed. And some right-handed.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you may find a wheel that doesn't suit you because it only goes one way.
Yeah.
So fortunately, mine goes either way. Sometimes it goes the wrong way, and I don't know about it.
How long from? Okay, let's say I'm someone who wants to commission you to do a piece,
right?
And I throw a few ideas at you. I'd like it to look like this. How long usually from
flash to bang?
Yeah, from inception to completion. Does that something like that normally take? I guess there's a lot of variables in there, like size and type and dimension, thickness, etc.
Well, the common factors are that it will take longer for a bigger piece to dry.
Yeah.
If it's modest in size, maybe 300 ml vase or whatever it is, 10 mil thickness all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
Then in this drying climate, and that's the other thing, we don't have drying rooms ourselves, a week is a reasonable length of time.
Wow.
From having thrown it
Yeah.
to dry. Then you can bisque fire it. And that's a 48-hour process.
What is bisque firing? Because again, you've said that a couple of times as well.
Bisque is a temperature that goes up to about 1,000 degrees centigrade.
Oh, wow.
That basically dries out the clay up to 100 degrees.
Yeah.
And then it chemically removes any hidden moisture within the clay up to 400 degrees. And then you can accelerate the temperature. Instead of going 50 degrees every hour, you can increase it 100 degrees every hour up to about 1,000. That's bisque dried. And of course it shrinks.
Right. Yep.
So some clays shrink 12%, porcelain can shrink 14 to 16% from the green form, the initial wet leather hard, to its final firing.
Yeah.
Then you've got to glaze it,
painting
it on. I like to dip, because dip is done.
Right.
Unless, of course, like Bocky Boo wanted 4 different glazes, so I had to do 4 different dips and spray things on.
Right.
And then you don't want glaze on certain parts, so you put wax on there. Or use a spray booth. So that's a longer process than most beginners anticipate and appreciate.
Yeah.
Then you do another 48 hours firing at whichever temperature is required of that glaze. Now, you have low firing glazes around about 1,046 degrees up to high mid-fire glazes, which is, I'm going to say cone 6. Potters will know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's 1,220 degrees.
Yeah.
Cone 10 goes up to about 1,260 degrees, and that's as far as you want to go. We don't go that far because at that temperatures, you don't need to. You've got things called frits that lower the actual temperature of the melting point of that glaze. So you don't need to wear out your kiln at cone 10. You can preserve your kiln, which is obviously important because they're expensive beasts, by doing a lower firing. So Cone 6 is a book by John Britt, an American. There's a John Britt Society, and I'm part of it, that only deals in Cone 6 firings.
Okay.
And see, he's a specialist, and you have like hundreds of recipes, if you like, or menus, or what you call them, for successful glazes.
Yeah.
And you can't guarantee these things, but there's a good chance it'll turn out okay, and then you can tweak the positioning in the kiln, the temperature. You might, because it's the heat value. It's not just going up and down, it may be going up and holding.
Yep.
So you don't hold at that same high temperature, you drop the temperature down a bit, but you get the same heat value at the end. So it's a fascinating, diverse...
There's a lot more to it than I think something like, myself, who doesn't really know. I would look at something, I'm not going to reference Ghost, but would look at something and go, I throw something on a wheel, and then I do some things with my fingers, and then I take it off. I then throw it in a kiln, and then paint it or glaze it, and then throw it back in. Bob's your uncle. It's not that simple.
No.
It's a lot more complicated. There's such an in-depth process to it. And I guess as time has sort of progressed on, those processes, you've been able to get a better understanding, and you're able to learn the science behind it more to get the most efficiency out of things.
There's a couple, what's a father and son, both engineers, chemists, I suppose, really, that developed their interest in pottery in later life, and they combined together to write this book. And it's, as a chemist would, precision, in terms of the chemistry, because it all to do with chemistry.
Yeah.
And if you can get a kiln that does exactly the same as his kiln does, the same temperature variations wherever it is, maybe the same scut kiln, and you have the same size of pot in there, made of the same clay, and the same thickness, and all those, everything in the gradation's the same. If the pyrometer's working, the heat sensor's working correctly, it doesn't bugger around.
Yeah.
There's a good chance it'll turn out close to what they're suggesting. The skill of the chemist will say, it's not shiny, it's a slight matte surface. If you added a little bit more of whatever, and there's actually a website that you can go on to. You have to pay a bit of money though, and it will say, all right, here's your chemical composition, and press the button, and it will calculate what will happen to your glaze, and it will say, oh, it's in the shiny zone, the gloss, which is what most people want.
Yeah.
If you then altered some of the chemistry, it will go outside that. So you have understanding of how to adjust what you do. And I have to say, that's like, I'm not an expert in that area. I find I struggle. I didn't do very well at chemistry at school. I do John Britt's recipes with some success. And I'm certainly going to do, from the collaboration, some of the glazes that I've managed to get the formulas and say, I'm going to try the copper. I really liked what he'd done. So it's a growth. And if you don't have that excitement, then what is there left to do? You know, there's always something new to sort of titillate your interest.
It's almost like alchemy.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, because essentially you're creating something by adding these common or not common things together, and it's just coming out of magic, really.
Well, we have some strange, dangerous chemicals like strontium, titanium. We don't use plutonium, but it's all that kind of...
Thank goodness.
It's a bit like, wow, don't breathe that in. You're using cobalt oxide, are you? Or even anything that you inhale in its dust form is dangerous.
Yeah, definitely.
So you've got to be safe about that. When it's in a wet form, it's a lot safer, but then it does dry out quickly on the bisque pots because they're sucking out the water.
Yep.
And then you're handling it. You've got to wash your hands. So there are health and safety issues about it. But if you're careful, you can,
It's amazing.
Be safe.
Okay, so it's almost felt like a bit of a masterclass. Editor Rocky, would you agree? There's just been Editor Rocky's nodding his head. It definitely feels like a bit of a masterclass in pottery. So let's bring it back to you. What have you got out and about or exhibiting, or what have you got coming up at the moment that our viewers and listeners really should know about? Because as someone who has gotten a massive amount of insight into pottery, I'd love to see some of this stuff.
Well, as probably most artists will admit, they're okay at making these things, but self-promotion and doing your own website is the hardest thing to do, because you want to go and make the pots.
Yeah.
If you don't have that interest, then you're not an artist. You see what I mean? So thank you for inviting me onto this.
You're welcome.
That's a great help. What I have currently in the sidelines is a 1.5 meter high water fountain made out of copper. And it's stylized in the form of a maple tree.
Yeah.
And all the hydraulics work. Bless you.
Thank you. I sneezed, everyone, just in case you were wondering.
And so the hydraulics was one concept.
Yeah.
The brazing, my plumbing skills come into it all, and then you've got to make sure all the water comes out the right orifices, and you've got to make sure there's some beauty attached to it. So they're all curved, flowing lines, and I've got a second, sort of parasite or a symbiotic relationship plant with the maple tree, and it's ivy.
Oh wow!
So it's kind of symbolising a relationship almost between the lady, the maple, and the ivy, who is providing you the support and the structure and the beauty of the whole thing, but unfortunately, left unchecked, could be a competition.
Well, because ivy grows everywhere. Ivy's like an ex-girlfriend that won't leave you alone. Anyway, is that something that you've finished, is it where can I see that?
Well, it's in my garage at the moment.
Oh, right.
Waiting for Sally Lush, who's the curator at the Sculptures on Shore at Takapuna. It's for the Women's Refuge. All the money is raised. So it's a great thing to support.
Yes.
And so you hopefully my piece will make the journey.
Yep.
And it'll be displayed. I'm going to, if they can't provide me with a pond, then I'll take my own pond down there and fill it with water and have some powered up. They may say, well, just show it dry rather than being a water fountain, because it has its own beauty without water coming out of it. But I think the water just tends to make it more interesting.
It adds another depth, doesn't it?
It brings it alive.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. So that's the current thing that's been on hold.
Yeah.
We've suffered a little bit because of the quarry arts. Sorry, the quarry gardens. When we did our art in there, I did some bluebells. They're about 1.5 meters tall, made out of copper framework.
Yeah.
With 3 ceramic bluebells inside, they're all sold, which is great. I don't have
That's
a
amazing.
stockpile of these things.
Yeah.
And I've made a few wooden carvings that I've done, and I did. It's my inspiration, but the word "atta" with a macron over the A at the top.
Yeah.
Out of a 3 meter tall bit of totara wood.
Oh, wow.
Carved by a Western society person, and I've forgotten who did that carving.
Yeah.
But the other side was a Maori carving by a person who had that influence, and I did the outline. So you've got 3 different cultures in there.
Yeah.
I also did the framework to hold it up and the pedestal as well, and that went to auction, and there was 2 people bidding for it. And the lady that won it was actually a headmistress of a school at Kawakawa.
Oh, wow.
And that was their, when I say motto, that was their word, atta.
Atta.
Yeah. So I feel quite privileged. If you want to go and see it, go and see it.
So it's at the Kawakawa...
I don't know which school. It's a primary school somewhere. I think it's a private one.
Oh, okay.
I don't
maybe...
honestly know.
That's right.
I've got the contact name and number and things.
That'd be amazing to have a look at, though.
And that was a collaboration between Benoit Averly, a French woodcarver.
Yeah.
He helped with the texturing of the wood.
Yeah.
And the other 2 names escape me because it's about 4 years ago I've done that.
That's all right.
Can't remember everything, unfortunately.
Thank you very, very much for coming in and sitting down and talking with us. It's been amazing for me. I feel like I've learned so much more than what I normally would from other guests. So, Rod Cunliffe, thank you very much for coming in and joining us. It's been amazing.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, there you go, everyone. That was Rod Cunliffe. And what a real treat it was to have Rod on. He was super cool, such a nice guy, and he answered a lot of my silly, I guess silly, but you know what? Maybe they weren't silly. Maybe they were questions that people that don't know a lot about pottery, like yourselves, if you're watching or listening, didn't know. And you're like, we really wouldn't mind having that question answered. When he talks about bisque. And I was like, what is a bisque? I know what a lobster bisque is. That's actually quite tasty. Funnily enough, not the same thing. Thank goodness, because I don't, you slap orange lobster bisque on pottery. I digress, though. But, he talks about these really interesting terms in the different ways that you can do pottery, and it was, for me, I learned so much from Rod, and it was a real pleasure. Yeah, a genuine pleasure too, just to be able to, I'm gonna go to my camera again, guys. It was a genuine pleasure to be able to have someone who had been doing it for such a long period of time. The interesting thing that I got out of the whole podcast with Rod. Yes, the pottery stuff was interesting. It was that 27-year period where he was working for the Royal Air Force, and he talks about that quite a bit. And I asked him the question whether or not his time in the military informed a lot of his processes in pottery and how he does things. And he said, yeah. And I was a little bit surprised because I had just taken 2 things that I didn't actually think were relevant, and I just thought I'd ask the question. So for him to say, yeah, I was like, wow, okay, cool. We're all on the same field here. This is great. So let's talk about the podcast. Where can you find our glorious podcasts? Where can you watch them? Where can you listen to them? I'll go through that information now. So, for video, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, all Northland Artists Conversation. For audio, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, all Northland Artists Conversation. We try and keep it simple here. Try and keep it simple. And if you are an artist, I knocked my microphone. If you're an artist and you would like to be on the podcast, or if you know someone who is an artist who you would love to see on the podcast, or think they would be really good here, we would love to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to us. And you can do that by emailing us hello@northlandartistsconversation.co.nz. Again, nice and simple. We keep it simple here. And we also have a Patreon as well. Now, Patreon is where you can donate a little bit more. You appreciate the podcast, you love what we do, you've been following, or you're new to it, and you go, man, these guys put out a really good product. Thank you, firstly. But if you want to support us, we have a Patreon account, and we have two tiers. We have a $5 tier, and that is what we've called a cup of coffee. And that's just a way of supporting us every month. $5, nice and simple. Second tier we have is $20 a month, and we've affectionately called that Coffee Addict. Now, what that gives you a little bit more. That gives you a couple of exclusive things that you don't get at the $5 tier. So that gives you a shout out, and it also gives you an opportunity to ask any of the guests that we have coming up a question, and I will sit here and ask the guest on your behalf. Now, we have had some patrons, so I'm going to shout those guys out now. We have had Lauren Roach. Thank you very much for your support. We appreciate that. Michael Boter, again, thank you for your support as well. And we have had Maggie Coco also donate as well. So, guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It does mean a lot. It means that we can keep this podcast going, and that's great. You can find us by one of two ways. You can go to Google and search Patreon. That's Patreon. Top right-hand corner. Create an account, sign in, and then search for Northland Artists Conversation. You'll find us there. Second way that you can do it is you can go to www.patreon.com/Northland Artists Conversation. We'll be right there as well. Guys, thank you so much. We really do appreciate the support and the ongoing love that we get. I'm going to go back to my wide camera. So, there we go. It's been, if I sort of recap where we are at the moment, we're in April. We've had some fine weekends. It's been really, really nice, I have to say. I've enjoyed getting out in the sun, going and doing stuff. A few weekends ago, I went to the Pride Parade in Whangarei. As someone who wears black, the black shirt and the cargo shorts, there was so much colour there and so many amazing people, and I am hoping to get some of those creatives in the chair so they can sit down and talk. So I've reached out to you. We hope to hear from you soon. So on behalf of myself, Mark Kelly, the host, and editor Rocky, who's with me tonight, thank you very much for watching the Northland Artists Conversation, and we will see you guys real soon.